Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This is Wes and your friendly clergy team in our favorite space, the Gann Chapel. We're actually recording this the day before Shabbat, the Ides of March, March 15th. So I can actually say on a Friday instead of on the usual Wednesday, Shabbat Shalom. It's great to be learning with you online this morning. I want to start our class this morning with a real story that happened to Michelle and Elias and me. And it's just so indicative, I think, of the moment that we're in. We were at Mayim Chaim, the mikveh. It was a purely joyful, happy, blessed moment. Incredible family from Temple Emanuel with two adorable children, ages 9 and 6, were going to the mikveh for their conversion. The kids are adorable. The parents were just so committed. Grandparents drove in from Connecticut. Happy, happy, happy. And we had a conversation with all three generations. They were all articulate, thoughtful, beautiful. It was just perfect day. And then the family goes to go get ready for the immersion in the mikveh, and Michelle gets this ping about an article about Teaneck, New Jersey. I lived in Teaneck. My brother Mark has lived in Teaneck for the last 45 years, and it turns out that at his shul, a small, lovely, humble, beautiful, small, quiet, Orthodox shul in Teaneck, New Jersey, there was a mob of Palestinian demonstrators chanting "Death to the Jews" and from the river to the sea, and Intifada revolution and no more Jews, and tearing up the Israeli flag. And this was happening in Teaneck, and it was this week, and it took hundreds of police dressed in riot gear with guns and shields, like a mamish riot, to let Jews in Teaneck, New Jersey, go to shul. And as soon as this happened, and as soon as so again, you're dealing with like a lot of dissonance, like a really happy moment at the mikveh, and then this horrific story. The minute we got out of the mikveh, I called my brother and asked how he was doing, and he said, thank God he's fine. He said that law enforcement was terrific, the police were terrific, but he said if it weren't for the police, and if it weren't for 200 police with riot gear, he would not have been able to go to shul. And he said, my brother is 74, he's 12 years older than me. He said, this is the first time in my life that I don't feel safe being a Jew in America. And there are stories like this all the time. I don't mean to be so cheery on March 15th, but just to put that in a further context, I was davening at Shabbat Alive last Friday night. It was a fantastic service, you guys. I just love that service. And this gentleman taps on my shoulder and asks if I'm one of the rabbis. Yes, can I talk to you? He's from Montreal. And he tells me that you should just know what's happening in Montreal. That Montreal has a federation like we have CJP, and that at their building in Montreal, the employees have not been able to work. They've not been able to go to work because there are mobs of Palestinian demonstrators with kafiyas and with the Palestinian flag shouting "Death to the Jews, death to the Jews." And the Jews who work in Montreal, Jews and non-Jews who work in that building, have asked the police and law enforcement to allow them a corridor so they can get to work, and the police said they're unable to do so. So the people who work at the Federation of Montreal were not able to go to work. They had to go to court, and they used the court system in Montreal to get an injunction which requires law enforcement to allow people to go to work in the Federation building. And he said to me that Montreal used to be such a strong and proud Jewish community, and now it is a bullied community that requires a court order to require police to let us go to work. That's the context for this question that we're teeing up, which is, I have a friend who's in the Jewish world, and this friend, it's not about Temple Emanuel, it's not at Temple Emanuel, was interviewing for a rabbi, and the rabbi candidate, as I shared in the teaser, excellent candidate, wonderful personality, great chemistry and connectivity, wonderful education, amazing background, Jewish summer camp, checks all the boxes. And then when my friend said, "And how are you on Israel? What are your views on Israel?" That's when the guy said, "I'm not anti-Zionist, but I'm just not a Zionist. Israel is a hot mess. It creates a lot of hot mess energy. It creates a lot of invidious negative energy, demonstrations and counter-demonstrations. And I want to build a chesed world, the world of love and justice. And so I'm just not into Israel, and Israel's not going to be a part of my rabbinate. And I wanted to ask us, if you were on the hiring committee, how would you view that candidate given the world in which we now live? So let's thank Hashem for the gift of learning Torah together. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, la'asok b'divrei Torah, v'harevna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu, u'b'fi amcha beit Yisrael, v'nihya anachnu v'tzatza'enu v'tzatza'ei amcha beit Yisrael, kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha lishma, Baruch atah Adonai hamalamed Torah la'amo Yisrael, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato, Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'Torah. So, dear colleagues, you're on the search committee. You know, TNEC happened, Montreal's happening. These kinds of things are happening all the time. What do you say to this candidate? What do you say to this candidate, and what would your vote be regarding this candidate?
My first question for him will be, Rabbi, you are well versed in liturgy and in books. What would you do on Friday night when we are closing the bracha of Apore Sukkot Shalom? Aleinu ve'al kol amo Israel ve'al Yerushalayim. Would you say it out loud? You're not thinking about Yerushalayim. What would you say? So that will be, I mean, there are so many times that Israel and Jerusalem come into, into our liturgy that we have to say daily, that how we'll confront him. I mean, that is just a starter, all right? Obviously, we have to consider him, because if he's that good, he can bring a lot of, insights and teaching and happiness to the congregation. So I don't see it as black or white. We'll have to do more research.
Yeah. Elias, let me ask you this question. I mean, he's not into Israel, but it's well known that his generation is also not into Israel, certainly not as into Israel as my generation, let alone our older generation, right? This is well known, and I mean, we all know this anyway, and Ezra Klein did a really thoughtful piece about the three different generations that grew up in the Holocaust and the founding of the state, and the generation that grew up with 67 and 73, and then this current generation that has just grown up with all the Hamas wars. So it's a generational thing, and it's common. So here's a question. If we have, if our 20-somethings and 30-somethings are already in that generation, and it just got a lot worse because of the bullying, then is it helpful to have a rabbi who partakes of that ethos and also has that? Or how do you think about that in terms of the constituents who want to connect to Israel?
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, all of us are privileged to be in a generation where Israel existed since we were born. And our previous generations, our ancestors, didn't have that privilege. And they suffer so much because, the time that you start being persecuted, you think, okay, at least I can go to Israel. That's my home. That will always be my home. And history, you can go back to any century in the last 2,000 years. Any century. Choose one century, 1300, 1400, 800, 500. You'll find that the Jews were persecuted and expelled from one or other country. So we have a tremendous privilege. I'm not so sure how much of that privilege our younger generations really appreciate. And I can argue that obviously it brings a lot of burden because your brother wants to go to a temple without any interference. But what would be the burden if Israel didn't exist?
Right. Yeah. So, Michelle, how do you think about this in terms of hiring this very lovely person, very thoughtful person, very committed Jew? After all, he could have gone into a different field. He chose to go into the rabbinate. How do you think about a rabbi who doesn't want to do Israel?
Yeah, I'm so shaken by the stories that you shared at the beginning of TNEC and Montreal and how quickly the sand shifts. And as I think about the question, it's not really a hiring question, right? It's actually a gut check question about us and our community. On the hiring level, you have the wisdom of thinking fast and slow. You have the idea that our first impression might not be our final impression. We should dig deeper. We should look. We should explore. I also think about the class we did a couple sessions ago. We talked about the great American rabbi shortage in liberal rabbis and the need for mentorship. And so on that level, I feel like we should engage this candidate deeply in a emotional conversation about what does it mean to be part of the people of Israel and to lead the people of Israel. And actually, I think his or her orientation or their orientation towards, hey, I don't need this, could be actually helpful because they may understand our young people in a different way. Not anti-Israel.
Right.
Not I'm against Israel, I'm against Zionism, but like, this is so heavy. Who needs this? I just want to do Yiddishkeit. Right. I want to make good Jews. I want to study all these books on the shelves. I just want to do Jewish. And in the context of the stories you shared, I just don't believe that such a candidate would be able to maintain a neutral position. So I would want to engage in a conversation that brought in the real life and perhaps see this person as a link to open the minds of those who are not yet there.
So, Michelle, let me just thank you for that because I want to draft on that energy for a second. Your comments are super helpful in the following way for me personally, which is I have actually a lot of sympathy for the instinct of can we just talk about Torah and mitzvah? Can we just talk about simcha shel mitzvah? Like I find like the big change for Judaism for me since October 7th is that the joy has largely gone out of it. Right, like Judaism used to be all about joy and Yiddishkeit and Shabbos and all that good stuff, and we still do all that good stuff, and we still sing the songs, and we still pray the prayers.
As we experienced minutes ago with the nursery school kids.
And the preschool, yes. Like there's all these wonderful, joyful things, but there was a certain kind of innocence to it. Now it's always like I feel, what's the word? I feel besieged. I feel like we're doing a wedding which is joyful, but in a world of siege outside. We were just with our, 3 and 4-year-olds and 2-year-olds, and so joyful for Kabbalat Shabbat, but there's a world of siege outside. And I'd love a world without siege, and I'd love a world without hate. So I'm very sympathetic to his instincts. Could we just, you clergy teams love to sing olam chesed yibana. Let's just build a world of love. Who doesn't want to just build a world of love? But so I really am sympathetic to that. But I guess here's my question for you, Michelle, and for Dan and Elias as well. With the sands shifting in real time, what new skills does a rabbi or a cantor or a Jewish educator need to bring to the table to help our people through this?
Yeah, I would argue that any rabbinic candidate who is not really for Israel is ignoring Torah. Right? Torah begins with God promising Avram, "The land I will show you." 99% of the Torah is the land I will show you, the land I will bring you to. That is so much the essence of Judaism, and to ignore that in a certain way, to me, makes absolutely no sense. And so I think but the skill I think that needs to be brought, that you just asked about, is the skill of understanding Jewish history. As Elias, mentioned, in any century that we haven't, been able to be in our homeland, our national anthem, Hatikva, it's all about being in the land of Israel.
So Dan, let me just understand your thinking here,
Yeah.
and I want to ask you for your vote on this. Right? On the one hand, you talk about the textual tradition, from Genesis 12, I'll take you to the land that I will show you, and the whole story, to your point, is about in the land and out of the land, home and exile. You're always, the whole biblical story and the Jewish people story is either we're going to Israel, we're in Israel, we just got kicked out of Israel, we want to get back to Israel. But Israel is always the center of gravity, textually, and in our prayer book. And then your point about Jewish history, the blood and tear-stained pages of Jewish history, culminating in the Holocaust, but by no means unique. I mean, every century has the Khmelnytsky massacre, This is Spring and Pesach and Easter, the Passion plays, and all the pogroms, the Inquisition, all that stuff. And so that's also screams in favor of the centrality of Israel, and yet our current generation is not feeling it. They don't feel that connection. So I want to ask you for your vote, Dan. You have this otherwise excellent candidate who just is parv on Israel or just does not want to talk about Israel. How do you vote?
I'm going to have to say no. And, just because I think it's clear that, that a rabbi in this generation needs to confront the younger generation to show to show our history, to show what Torah is really what's really central in Torah, and if they're not going to do that, I don't think that they could have all the other skills in the world, but if they're not going to engage the younger generation in being connected to Israel, I don't think that that's a person we want to have.
But I mean, there are obviously, needless to say, different things. First of all, we are not part of the board, we, four of us, which is great. We don't have to make that decision. There are so many other things. I mean, will that person be the only rabbi in the congregation? Mm-hmm. Will be coached and taught by more senior rabbis who are in the building? Is the congregation in favor of hiring somebody like him because they don't want to have anything to do with Israel? So it has to do more like with what's the situation in that congregation specifically.
Yeah, Michelle, how would you vote? And then I want to pivot from your actual thinking about what you would vote to how you see this young person who is so much like so many of our young people in terms of the 4 children of the Pesach Seder.
I think I would vote with a growth mindset because this is something we can work with, right? I love Torah and mitzvahs. Israel, I just want to stay away from it, I think is a growth edge because, as you've all articulated, when you get into any community in really anywhere in the world today, but especially in America, you can't not deal with Israel. This rabbi is going to have to grow. This rabbi is going to have to stretch. This rabbi is going to have to take their Torah that they're learning and see it through new eyes. I mean, even in our Parsha tomorrow, we have a little segment about the Choshen Mishpat and the idea that there are these stones that are placed on them. What's on the stones? They're engraved with each of the tribes of Israel, and the high priest has to literally wear Israel on them, on their body, to say, my fate, our fate as a people is intertwined. And you can't escape the fact that we are connected not only as a people, but also to the land of Israel. And I think the Torah that this rabbi studies will bring them back. There's a beautiful Talmudic imagination that pictures God up in heaven saying, would that my people would abandon me but continue to study my Torah, for my Torah will bring them back to me. And the same thing with Israel.
So let's pivot from this rabbinical candidate. For what it's worth, my vote would be this. I would have an honest and transparent conversation with this candidate, and I would try to gauge whether there was a capacity for growing and evolving. And if this candidate said, sure, I have an open mind, and yes, I'm new at this, and I'd love to learn, and I'm open to rethinking, then I would be inclined to hire this candidate for many reasons, not least of which is this candidate can best understand our children who are that age. But if this candidate was like for Brent on, I'm just parv on Israel, and even more so, this was not the real case situation. But if you have an anti-Zionist rabbi, definitely not. I mean, that would be a categorical no for me. I want to pivot from that rabbi to our children more collectively. I think we've got Purim coming up next week, which means we've got Pesach coming up next month, which means we have Seders, which means we have generations. And it's all happening in the midst of this hot mess of the Jewish world. I'm wondering, the voice of our children that say, Mom, Dad, or, grandpa, ma, saba, savta, I'm not into Israel, or more. You know, you guys are off on Israel. You guys are reading from an old playbook on Israel. The Israel that you love is not the Israel that is anymore. The Israel that is now is just morally compromised and morally stained, and you don't get it, but, you know, my generation gets it. How do you think about that voice, which is going to be around our Seder tables? I think the wise wicked doesn't know how to ask a question, or the simple naive feels like a useful launching pad. So what comes up for you when you integrate Keneged Abanim to this current generation, or to much of this current generation?
Well, I mean, the main point here is, I mean, in my own personal case, my kids are pretty much in the same page that my wife and I are. So we are not going to envision that, and we are not to encounter that, and also the relatives who are coming, we are all on the same page. The question becomes, and perhaps, you know, some of you, if you have more experiences, I would be comfortable sitting at a table with somebody who disagrees with me, but is willing to hear. If there is, I don't want to talk about it, you know, this is horrible, this should never happen, that's very hard to take. And I wouldn't feel even comfortable sitting at a table with somebody like that.
But with that person who, and here's the thing, and we all know this, views about Israel are deeply held. They're deeply convicted, right? If you think that, you know, Israel is committing genocide against the people of Palestine, and we have kids who, quite mistakenly, think that. My question is, they're not gonna listen, and you're not gonna listen to them. They're not gonna listen to you. So the question I have is just, I'm trying to step back from that very hard and painful conversation. And I've shared this with before, that we have survivor families where a grandparent survived Auschwitz, and now the grandchild says that we are doing genocide, and the middle generation, my age, says, honey, don't say that, because your grandfather actually survived genocide. Israel's fighting a just war justly. And there's tragically a lot of loss of life for which Hamas is accountable. Don't call that genocide. And that's among parents and kids. So if you're talking about a Seder table, that just feels like you're not going to get anywhere with that. So my question is, I want to zoom out. How do you understand that in terms of the categories that tradition has given us? Chacham, Rasha, Tam, She'ena Yodei Lishol. Or are those categories just not even helpful here? Michelle?
You know, I'm of two minds. I'm being pulled in two directions, because on the one hand, I believe really strongly that the Seder, I mean, it's a long book, the Haggadah.
Yeah.
The Seder is meant for conversation. This is the moment when we talk about our deepest ideals as a people. And Israel is one of those deeply held ideals, and it has a place at our Seder, and it's incumbent upon each of us to try to connect with our next generation, to have the conversation, and even sometimes to hear things that are uncomfortable for us to hear at our. That is, if not,
That's the work of a Seder.
Yeah, that's the night. That's what it's for.
Right.
And the four children which you brought very clearly say there are times when you say, no, that's actually outside of the bounds of what is acceptable within our family, within our home, within our community. What's so interesting to me and is endlessly fascinating is that the wise and the wicked child are so similar, right? There's very little
What's your read about the difference?
distinction. That I mean, the wise child talks longer.
Right.
You know, it has to be in tone of voice, because what they say is not so significantly different. And I think that probably is the crux of it, that it's about tone of voice. There is a moment where we say to our children, please come in and have this conversation. It's important for your growth. It's important for our growth. And then there's a moment that we say, guys, this one is not tenable in a world of Teaneck and Montreal.
I would ask, the first thing that comes to mind when I think about the four children is that specifically for this year, when we get with our 20s and 30s, we should have a fifth one. And the fifth one should be Shelo Rotze Lishmoa. That doesn't want to hear, doesn't want to engage in a conversation.
Yeah. So actually, this conversation is making me rethink whether the categories that are thousands of years old, that have been in the Haggadah for all of our lives, are actually helpful categories. So, for example, I don't think Rasha is a helpful category. You know, well, hold on. For the person who says I'm not into Israel, or for the person who says I'm morally gravely troubled by what Israel's doing, I don't think Rasha applies to that. On the other hand, for the person who, I would say that, you know, Jewish Voices for Palestine and JVP and all these things that are anti-Zionist, I think and by the way, one of the narratives that you hear, like when I asked my brother, how did this Teaneck thing happen? It turns out it was a Jewish city council member who was fanatically anti-Israel, who started spreading a lot of rumors on social media and social media platforms, saying horrible things about Israel, the Jewish people, and Teaneck. And he's Jewish, and he whipped, you know, the progressive left into a frenzy. It was Jewish. And when I met with one of our undergrads here, who grew up here, who's at Lafayette, she said the most vocal anti-Israel people are Jewish students at Lafayette. And that makes it really challenging to talk about what a normative Jewish view is when they say, hey, we're Jewish and we're hating on Israel. So I think for that view, I'm kind of comfortable talking about Rasha, for me. But then the question is, in the text, you know, the parent hikat shinav, you know, hits him across the teeth. That doesn't feel like that advances anything. So what do you do when you have somebody who has that view?
Right. And it shuts down. And
It shuts down.
I don't think while my gut says there are moments where you say you are being destructive, and
Right.
therefore that's the category of Russia. I agree with your original assessment that the category of Russia does not seem to work, and that's partially because of another piece of the Seder that we have where we dip our fingers into the wine and you pour out a little bit for the suffering of our enemies. You know, those Jews who are out there, you know, anti-Zionist, from their perspective, right? Not from mine, but from their perspective, they feel that they are embodying that teaching that they probably learned every year at the Seder, that we care about the suffering of those who are not us.
So therefore, Michelle, even for that view that is really hostile to Israel and claims that it's genocide, etc., do you, even then, you think the category of Rasha is not so helpful?
So I think it's helpful to me, right? As a category for me to say, you know, this hurts. This doesn't feel okay in our family. Right? That's helpful. And yet, I don't think it's effective or impactful. The Rasha, calling somebody a Rasha, all it does is it alienates them from the conversation.
You don't like my fifth category?
Right. Well, we'll get to
all
your
it
fifth
does is
category.
alienate them from the conversation. And if the Choshen teaches us and the Ephod teaches us anything, that the high priest has to carry all those 12 tribes, not just the ones that agree, but the ones who disagree too.
I was once at a dedication where somebody dedicated a significant space, and this person was giving a teaching, and he said that if two people are disagreeing, and I'm using his language, and I say to you, you're a bastard, and you say to me, no, I'm not the bastard, you're the bastard, then the conversation is over, and what have you accomplished? And in a way, the Rasha, labeling Rasha kind of does that. So let me flip the script and ask, what does, in today's world, with all of its complexity and sadness, what does chacham look like? What does chacham look like?
That's even a worse category.
Why?
Because everybody thinks he's a chacham. The people, I mean, Rasha is accusatory. Chacham is like, yes, of course. I'm very intellectual. I know more than you about this, and I'm the one who is right.
But what I love that you say that, because it's so real. And I think in the Haggadah, at least, the answer to the chacham kind of gives us the answer that we're searching for. The chacham is the one who wants to learn more. And that's something we can all work with. It's not someone who thinks they have all the answers, but someone who wants to learn more.
Right, teach me more of the complexities.
So
there.
I think if we have someone who wants to learn more, it's incumbent upon us to engage and to connect and to learn together.
Yeah, I learned that from, you'll remember, Michelle, that after the last Gaza war in 21, when rabbinical students from the different seminaries wrote that letter that was very critical of Israel and showed little to no sympathy for Israel or Israelis, I marched into your office and I said, if I die, if I get killed in a car crash, promise me you will never hire a rabbi.
You said it in a Talmud class.
memorable.
Go to Michelle's office.
Promise me you will never hire a rabbi who signed this letter. I would literally roll over in my grave to think that I was dead and somebody came into this temple and had signed that letter. I'd be rolling over in my grave. Promise me you'll hire a pro-Israel rabbi. And I was so convicted of that. I was speaking of conviction. Everybody's convicted with what they say about Israel. And in the end, I recanted from that position. I felt that it was a wrong position because I was taken by the wisdom of Daniel Hartman, who said he would see those signatures on that letter as an invitation to a moral conversation, and that being a chacham is not having the right answers or all the answers, but being a chacham is a mindset that says, all of us are aware of the person I want to be and the person that I am and the person I want to be and the work that I have to do to get there. And all of us are aware of America that is and the America that we want to be and the work that we have to do to get there. And the same gap exists with Israel. The Israel that is, the Israel that should be, and the work that we have to do to get there. That's a moral conversation about filling that gap. And that the Chacham is somebody who's alive to that, with Israel, with America, with our own self, with our own family, with our own marriage, with our own kids. What's the work we need to do to become the person, the country, the family person, the Israel that we want to be? And we're engaged in a dialogue on getting there. And so take that as an invitation. So in the end, I recanted from what I said to you, and I'm wondering how that wisdom of Daniel applies to this moment.
I have two things I want to mention. So I think that partially we need to think about the she'eno yodei lishol in this context, because we have this generation that we maybe can talk about Rasha, but we also need to focus on even the younger generation, as you said, our 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 10-year-olds, where we need to educate them, that newer generation, to have more of a love for Israel. The other thing, thinking about Pesach and the Seder, the whole thrust of the story, again, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, the whole thrust of the story is why are we taken out of Egypt? To go to the land of Israel. Right. So that's such an important thrust in terms of what we're talking about.
And what I love about Danielle's observation is that we often do see ourselves as the wise child, as the chacham.
Right.
And if you have a voice, a Jewish voice, that says, "See their suffering," yes, actually, that is a Jewish voice. It's a hard one when you've been hurt and when your safety is at risk and when the Jewish people in the land of Israel is at risk. But it is also a Jewish teaching that we see the suffering of even our enemies and a growth edge for us as well. And therefore, somebody who wants to have that conversation may be able to join us at the Chacham table to all be willing to grow together. I think the Rasha is only when we say we're done.
Perfect end. Let's not be done. Let's dialogue, and let's together get to a better, more thoughtful, wiser place. Thank you, guys. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.